Again this morning. This is Brother Peter with tidbits from the Word. What a beautiful world we live in. The world itself that God made and God created. He created it perfect. And He created it that a perfect man could live on a perfect earth and live actually forever on this earth. Our bodies were designed that every 7 years they pretty much remake themselves all the way. And had no sin come into the world, we would have lived for years and years. Now, during the 1,000-year reign, we call the millennial reign, there will be babies born that will live that full 1,000 years. At 100 years old, they'll still be a child. And that happened in the Old Testament when God first made the earth. And we saw men that lived as much as 900 years. And at 100 years old, if you live in 900, you'd still be a child. So, this book of Habakkuk we're going to get into today is a book of one of God's servants. A young man, little man, just a man, just like you or I, just like any man on this earth. Here's Habakkuk. Habakkuk's name means to wrestle or to engage. That's what his name means. And Habakkuk was kind of, in a way, going to wrestle with words with God, the God of heaven, the God that he still has. By the way, Habakkuk is now living in heaven. He is one of our brothers gone on. We will be with him one day. Habakkuk did not die, if you please. His body went to the grave, and his soul and spirit went to heaven to be with God. And he is still there today. And he's there. And when we get there, if we want to know him, we need to learn to know him right now. We need to get his book out. We need to read it. His book is a small book. It's the 35th book of the Bible. It has 3 chapters in it, just 3 little chapters. Here's a man that wrote 3 little chapters, a conversation with God. Here's a man had a conversation with God. Here's a man that was close enough in his heart and his mind. He was concerned about the justice for God more than he was the justice for the people of Israel, of Judah. He would like to have seen Judah, or Israel, delivered from their dilemma that they had made themselves by not following God's commandments. If you don't follow God's commandments, you're going to receive to yourself some type of retribution. Now, retribution is from God. God created it to be a correction, a way of correction. If you do not correct something, then it goes awry. You can take, for instance, today, we have a generation of children today who have not been corrected by their parents, and therefore they're out here shooting each other, killing each other, doing dope, doing everything, with seemingly thinking they're going to do all this stuff without any retribution. And then they end up in prison, they end up in jail, and they end up dead. And many of them will end up dying and going to hell because they had no correction when they were younger. We need a slap on the hand every now and then. When we get out of line, we need to be brought in line. And how do you get brought in line? You get brought in line by correction. If you're on a job, you go to a new job, and here it is. You've never touched whatever it is that you're fixing to do. And they're going to put you on a machine. And they're going to tell you this machine, once you know it, is very simple. But until you get to know it, it's very dangerous. So we're going to show you how to stay out of danger's way, and we're going to correct you every time you do something wrong until you see the danger. And that's the problem today. We have a group of people on this earth today who have not been corrected, and they don't see the danger. What kind of correction are you talking about, Brother Peter? I'm talking about the correction of spiritual correction. Of course, physical correction is important too. If you've got a baby, a little child, when he's 2 years old, if you let him just throw everything off the coffee table that he wants to on the floor, and you say, oh, I would rather you didn't do that. No, you need to get a paddle out and pop his bottom or his hand with it and say, do not do that. And then that way there, when he's 4, he'll know he doesn't do that kind of thing. And when he's 5 and 6, and when he gets 25, he'll be following that same pattern. And you'll have a child that you've delivered from hell because you corrected him when he was young. Now, we've got three chapters, just 3 little chapters in this book, just 56 verses. 56 little old verses in this book of a man talking with God throughout this book. This is what Habakkuk was doing. Habakkuk got a vision. That vision scared Habakkuk. That vision, Habakkuk, his bones, he said, rotted within him. Hey, when you come face to face with God, you're going to be in shock. And that's what Habakkuk was. He came face to face with God, and he was in shock. And if you ever had something you faced and it just kind of made you throw up or vomit because it hit you so. Well, this is how Habakkuk was here. And it was written, by the way, Habakkuk wrote the book. He was the one who wrote the book. In 1:1 we see that, and 3:1 we see that. Habakkuk was the one that wrote the book. And it was before Christ now, about 600 and some years before Christ. And Habakkuk was a prophet. What is a prophet? What is a prophet? What was a prophet? What was a prophet before Jesus came and went to the cross? They were prophets. And they were called out of God specifically to leave a message. And here's a man like Jacob. Jacob literally wrestled with God, but here's a man that wrestled with God in words. In words. This is an astounding book. If you would get it, if you could grasp it, if you could see a man with the ability to vision and see God, the vision that God gave him. You remember when God spoke the earth into existence? You remember when he said, "Let there be light," that there was already light on the earth? That light was God himself. God himself is light. He was the light of this earth until he made the sun. And when he made the sun became the light. And when it comes back down now to the spiritual light of this earth, God is still the spiritual light of the earth. And he is the spiritual light of this earth. Now, Habakkuk, to prove his authorship, and that's just something we little finite human beings always want to prove something. We want to prove we're right, or we want to prove somebody else is wrong, or we want to prove something all the time. Well, let me tell you something about studying the Bible. The Bible proves itself. Habakkuk tells these Judy people in Judah and Palestine, he tells them, Abraham's children, he says to them, he said, you're going to be punished by another country. Babylon is going to come down, and they are going to destroy you if you continue this path that you're on. And they would not listen to him. They would not listen to him, even though he was sent here by God. Now, when he wrestled with God, this is one of the things that he saw. He saw that God, he said, came from Teman and Mount Paran in the glory and power to Israel, to lead Israel through the wilderness. God came from his place, Teman. That's the vast universe. God came from Teman, the vast universe. And he came personally, himself, to lead the children of Israel. And he had his holy anointed one with him, which was Jesus. And Jesus said, I was the rock that followed the children of Israel. I was the water they drank. And Jesus was the anointed one of God to do the things that God had him do before he came in the flesh and died on the cross. And Jesus was with God before the creation. You find that, if you want to look at it, in chapter 8 of Proverbs. And you can look at that. His glory covered the heavens. His glory covered the heavens. Did you know before he made the stars and the moon and the sun, his glory was the light of heaven. His glory lighted the heavens and lighted everything. And by the way, the sun really doesn't necessarily light up all of the sky we're looking at today out here. There is a light beyond the sun's light, and that's the light of God and his glory. And the earth was full of his praises. This earth was full of his praises until the devil came along and stuck a little old splinter in there and started. You know how when you get a little old splinter, if you don't take care of it and just leave it alone, it'll fester. And it'll fester. And sometimes it'll get to where you can rot your hand off just from that one little old splinter. And that's what it was. There was a splinter on this earth named the devil. And he came and he stuck a splinter in this earth. And it's been festering now ever since the fall in the Garden of Eden. Anyway, Habakkuk, let's get back to Habakkuk. We were looking at, he had 3 chapters, he had 56 verses, 1,476 words in this little writing. You could almost, almost read this whole book with three good breaths. Take 3 good breaths and start reading, and just about read the book. And in this book, he had 12 questions that he asked. He asked questions to the people, and he asked questions to God. And he made statements. God gave him a revelation in words. He was wrestling with words. Remember now, this is a wrestling match of words with man and God, and they're wrestling over these words. And listen, can you imagine? This is 700 years before Jesus. And there are people that would say, well, they didn't have writing then or whatever. Well, they did. They had writing. And he's penning this down, and perhaps he's penning it by himself. This is a prophet that is perhaps penning by himself. Some of the prophets had scribes, had other people pen down what they were saying, like in Isaiah and them that wrote many, many words. And they're walking along, and God's giving them revelation, and their scribe is walking with them, and they're telling their scribe, and the scribe's penning it down. I believe Habakkuk penned this himself. And it has about 12 questions in it, and it's got a command in it. And the command is righteousness, by the way. And there are no promises in the book of Habakkuk. It doesn't promise anything, yet there is a promise in the sense that if you do not follow God, you are promised to be separated from God forever. The ultimate end of not following God is eternal separation from God. That is a promise. That's a promise. And we can see that. There are 20 predictions if the children of Israel were to continue their route, the way they were going, the way they were treating God and whatever, that they would, in the end result, be separated from God for eternity. Listen, God made an eternal plan. He didn't make a temporary plan. He made an eternal plan. What God did was eternal. Your soul was made to live in eternity with God. It's going to live somewhere in eternity forever. It can live with God or with the devil for eternity, whichever you choose to do. And there are 11 verses of prophecy in this book. And those 11 verses, what they prophesy was, here again, I'm kind of repeating myself in a sense, that you continue this way, you're going to receive the punishment. You continue the way you're going, and you will receive the punishment. You want to change your way and turn around and go the other way and follow God, your prediction would be you will have righteousness, you will have good in the land and plenty in the land, you'll have plenty to eat. The Babylonians won't be your boss, they won't come steal you away. By the way, the Babylonians, when they took the women and the children and made slaves out of them, they made all kinds of slaves out of them. They made sex slaves out of the women. They made sex slaves out of the children. They made slaves are their children to do the work, to do everything. Listen, the adults of that day in Judah that were not following God didn't realize they were putting their children on a chopping block. They were putting their children in harm's way to be treated the way they were. You see some of those children. You see, as you read about Daniel was taken into captivity, yet he followed God throughout. You see, Nehemiah was taken into captivity when he was young, yet he followed God throughout. You see, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you see them, they were taken into captivity, yet they followed God. And even though they were taken into this heathen nation, they did not deny their God. And we see there are two distinct messages from God. Chapter 1 and verse 5, let's take a look at that. Chapter 1 and verse 5 says, "Behold, ye among the heathen, and regard and wonder marvelously, for I will work a work in your days, which ye will not believe, though it be told you." Wow. And God's saying this is going to be so horrendously bad, you won't believe it. Even though I told you it's going to happen, it's going to be so horrendous, you're not going to believe it. And this is God telling him that. And then in chapter 2 and verse 2, "And the Lord answered me and said, Write this vision and make it plain upon tables, that it may run that readeth it." Those that read it would know what they were reading and see it. You see, the vision was told, God said, you write it down. So we see Habakkuk was the author of this book. Habakkuk was the one that penned it down. Now, as I read it and study it, I say, my goodness, how could a man be so smart? How could a man see God from Teman? How could he see the mountains? How could he see how God came and formed the mountains and walked through the sea, rode through the sea on horses and chariots? How could this God revealed to this little man, Habakkuk, many, many things in a vision. Let me show you a couple of those things he revealed to him. He revealed that his glory was what covered the heavens. He revealed that to Habakkuk. And when Habakkuk saw that, you know what he said? He said, my concern from now on, God, is going to be for you and how you get treated. He wasn't really overly concerned that the children of Israel, that these people in Judah, in the land of Palestine, were going to be annihilated, crucified, tore apart, stole away, treated like slaves and everything. He was more concerned that God was being desecrated, that the Lord God was being desecrated. Look at this, the holiness and justice of God. Now Habakkuk was interested in vindication of God. He said, I'm going to stand up for God. I got a question for you today. If you're watching Brother Peter on Tidbits on YouTube here, you probably have a God conscience. You probably have a spiritual bone in your body, and you're spiritually thinking, what could God use me to do? I can tell you one thing God can use you to do, and that's to defend Him in a world today that is against Him. To say, when you hear somebody say in cuss words, God, and the word damn, when you hear that, you say to that person, do you know if God did what you just said, you would end up in hell forever? If God was to damn this world, you would end up in hell forever. That's standing up for God. That's saying there is a God. There is. As a matter of fact, funny thing is an atheist will take God's name in vain. He says, I don't believe in God, I'm an atheist, yet he'll take God's name in vain. It's crazy, isn't it? He doesn't realize the conundrum that he's putting out his own self. And so the vindication is of God is what Habakkuk was interested in. Not so much that the people of Israel escaped, but that God was vindicated, even though Israel was fixing to go into great punishment. And this poor Habakkuk could see that. And the whole prophecy now, the whole little book, the whole little 56 verses is one man talking with God, conversing with the God of heaven, the God that created the heaven and the earth. I got a vision myself. The vision myself is that God took this man to a place and revealed himself to him. Habakkuk could have been possibly in a cave, in just a hole. He could have been anywhere, not seeing anything other than seeing God being revealed. You or I watch a movie on a screen. If you would have put a movie on a screen back 100 years ago, people wouldn't have believed it. They just wouldn't have believed it was possible that could happen. Well, I'm going to tell you, God put a movie on the screen for Habakkuk. And Habakkuk is watching this movie. He sees God come from heaven in his glory. And he sees the earth full of his presence. And he sees the brightness was the light. And he said he had horns. In other words, the rays of light were coming out of his head. And to Habakkuk, he didn't know how to say it any other way than, man, there's horns coming out of him. And so Habakkuk said he had horns coming out of his head. And he says, look, and he said, there was the hiding of his power. Wow. His power was there, but his power was hidden from many people. Habakkuk could see it. And he said, before him went the pestilence. Hey, when God moved across this earth, everything was in front of him moved. You ever come upon a herd of deer? What do? They move. They're gone. You ever come up on a flock of birds? They fly away. And this is what he's saying. He's saying God's moving across this earth, and as he does, everything moves away from him. Hey, it said wherever he stepped his foot was like coals of fire. Hey, God is a consuming fire. Come on in. He's a consuming fire. And come on in. Yeah. Don't let the dog out. Ooh, don't let him out. We'll never catch him. Come on in.
I just want to see if we can borrow some power to hook up our main over there.
You sure can. You sure can. You can take my big yellow extension cord that I've got run that way.
Yes.
And run it right over there if you need to. No problem. Help yourself anytime. And give me a dog.
I thought I was doing a good deed the other day. I thought I was hitting that good little leg.
Yeah.
These people want me, I painted this big ball for
Yeah.
18-foot ceiling.
Yeah.
And when I got through painting it, they said, we don't like the color.
Oh, no.
I said, well, I told y'all, it looked fine, but I painted it a year ago and it looked good to me. It was olive green.
Uh-huh.
And he said, well, what did you charge to come back over and paint? I said, I'm going to take the charge now. I got stuff going on and I really don't even want to do it again.
Yeah.
Big room, just 4 hours of paint.
Uh-huh.
Just walls. I said, $180. I went over and done it for 3.5 hours. Made out like a bandit.
All right.
Well, he was running that heater over at 85. He got me to sweating, and I went outside after leaving the job with a wet heater. I said, boy, this ain't good. It's like 11 o'clock at night. This ain't good. I bet I'm going to get sick. Messed around, got sick.
Yeah.
This Saturday and Sunday, I made about 160 a day. Well, like with my cousin up in the line, couldn't go to work Saturday and Sunday and then miss yesterday. So
Wow.
$180. Maybe they take things through a little bit. Maybe I should have given him a little break. I got the 180 and it ended up costing me about 400.
Yeah. Well, go ahead. Let me keep these documents. Take it out. We'll never get them back in. Just take that yellow cord right there. Either one of them or both of them.
I can take these yellow ones.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. Be good. Running right across the yard there. Yeah. All right. Here I am again. I'm coming. I'm coming. We have sometimes we have a little interruption right in the middle here. We had a little interruption, but it's all right because we're back and we're back in Habakkuk and the command. Let's see. God was visiting with Habakkuk, and we saw that he saw the presence of God, and there was a hiding power. And went before him, and the pestilence went before him, and the coals of fire was by his feet. And he stood and measured the earth. Now God's given this young man, this Habakkuk guy, he's given him a revelation of what God is doing before. But this is way back before. So he's actually literally in the presence of God, and God's showing, revealing him these things. Do you say, would God reveal to you or I these things? Yes, he will. Hey, you get close enough to God, he'll reveal to you some things. He will reveal to you some things. All right. And he stood and measured the earth, and behold, and drove asunder the nations. God drove asunder the nations. It would be like you taking a box of toothpicks out, have a cupcake sitting in front of you, and you stick these toothpicks around on that cupcake, wherever you decide you want them. And that's what he said God did. God set up the nations. He stuck the poles in for the nations that would be on this earth. And see, God sees the end from the beginning. Do you think God did not know America was going to be here? Did you not think that God knew that he was going to be the founder and the author of the American people and the continent of America? That God himself was going to be the one that said, I am going to sanction America to be the continent where it is and to be the nation where it is. And did, by the way. And then, do you know the Bible said the people that forget God, the nation that forgets God, will be turned into hell. And I'm telling you, it's getting more and more hellish every day in this nation. Every single time we leave God out, put man in, we're getting more hellish. This is what Habakkuk saw. He saw that all of it boiled down to being God. If it wasn't God, it wasn't righteousness. And if it wasn't righteousness, it was not what pleased God. And so what pleased God was righteousness. But let's look at this. He said he walked across the perpetual hills and his everlasting mountains. He scattered the mountains. And he's saying this to us. He rode upon his horses and his chariots. In verse 8, he's saying of chapter 2. He rode on his horse and chariot. And his bow was made quite naked, according to the oaths of his tribes, even his words. In verse 9, here he's got a bow. And he's got a quiver full of arrows. And he has shot all of the arrows. And now his bow is naked. He has no arrows to put back in the bow. He delivered all the arrows to the people. He delivered them all. And they flaunted them away. They said, no, we don't want it, God. We don't want what you want us to have. We want what we want. We want to please the flesh. And that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to please the flesh. And let's look at this. He cleaved to the earth with rivers. Can you see that he's cleaving through the earth with rivers? And he's cleaving through. Come on in. Watch the dogs. Don't let the dog out. Come on in here. And we see that he did. Look, I will pick up next time. I'm going to close for now, and I'll pick up next time where I left off. Okay, it's Brother Peter with tidbits from the Word. See you next time. Bye-bye.